Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
I was home and heard it on the radio and just couldn't believe it. I could only have been about 14 or 15 when that happened, but really ticked me off, and I wanted to get in there and get part of it.
I was 8 years old, and that night we all gathered around the radio. It was, well, after supper, we knew there'd be a presidential speech. And so we gathered around the radio, and I can still remember the words ringing in my ears, you know. That.
I think, Mother was really scared. I think she was really, and then her brother was sent over to the islands. All the men were gone, everybody kissed us goodbye, And I think she was very fearful, and they were fearful that they would invade the United States. Thank God they were stopped.
Yes. I was in a drugstore when I heard about it. I had been to the drugstore to get some medicine for my son who was sick. He was just a baby in Racine, Wisconsin. And I heard about it at the drugstore.
We'd been, some of us guys in this barracks had been to eat dinner on Sunday morning or Sunday noon, and we'd come back to the barracks to wait till they opened up a theater to go to the movies in the afternoon. Well, somebody had a radio in there, and they told about the attack on Pearl Harbor. So when we went to stand in line to go to this movie, well, we told some of the guys in the line. And that shocked some of them. They turned around and went back to the barracks. Well, they hadn't heard about it.
I and 2 or 3 other guys got up on a Sunday morning. That's when I was young and full of pep. And we went and we heard it, and he says, "Let us at those little yellow so-and-so." You kind of backed off a little sense, but patriotic and all that. But I remember very well, that people were, well, why did they do that? The Americans give them this and that and this and that. But I remember.
I was at home with my parents at Bement, Illinois, listening to the radio when I first heard it.
2 of my friends in a car going to Taylorville, Illinois, roller skating. And we had the radio on, and of course, here come the news about the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor, which will undoubtedly lead to war. And we looked at each other and we said, well, where in the world is Pearl Harbor? We had never heard of it. It's not like today. And I don't know whether they went ahead and said it was part of Hawaii. And so all 3 of us went the next day to join up.
No, I didn't get to choose, but after they got me in there, they got to inquire on what experience I had, so they wanted me to join the Air Force. Well, you had to sign up for the Air Force for 3 years, and I wasn't crazy about doing that. But I thought, well, that might be better than carrying a rifle down the Philippines, so I signed up for 3 years, so they give me a discharge for 5 days for being in the regular Army.
I wanted to go before. When I was a freshman in high school, our class was 44. When I graduated, the class was 20, and there was only 5 boys in it. And one of them got killed, and just as soon as you got out of school, you went someplace in the service. I mean, you was gone. I think they drafted everybody in Arthur up to 35 years old. There wasn't too many men left in town.
And I went to the draft board and signed on there because I thought the war would only last about a few months. What a mistake.
And he was 38 too. He's 38 years old. And so he decided then to go to the draft board and volunteer, which he did. And that way he had more choice of his branch of service, and he went into the artillery. And then later, when they found out that he was a photographer, then he became their battalion photographer.
And they were really bad shape in Guadalcanal. That's one of the first big and the most serious combats there were. We almost lost it. That's why I went there. The Marines were about to get whipped. Oh, they took a murderous rap.
I got a letter and told me that Uncle Sam wanted me. And I first reported in Chicago for an examination. In January of '42, and shortly after that I had a head-on collision in Decatur, and my knees were damaged, my face was cut up, and so I had to report and tell them I couldn't go until later.
Then from a newspaper ad, he and Dale Fulton answered an ad and joined the RAF, the Royal British Air Force. And they were accepted. He'd been flying for a long time, and he was about maybe 25, 27 then, by that period of time. Mother was just young and raising us. So he went into the Royal British Air Force and earned captain, flight captain, and he ferried planes across to England.
They went to Europe, and they were in England, and of course they got more training in England, and they got some amphibious training in England because they were going to go across the channel. But while they were in Europe, there was something interesting happened. The English were short on manpower. So our servicemen helped the English harvest their potato crops that year, which was kind of a relief to some of their other activities.
Well, I went up to Great Lakes, and my dad asked me, he said, don't. I always said I wanted to be in the Marine Corps, and he told me, made me promise him that I wouldn't join the Marine Corps. So I went up there for my physical, and they needed 26 Marines, and nobody would volunteer, so they came along. We just had our shorts on, picked out the ones they wanted, and I was one of them. Came back home, told my dad that I was drafted, and he looked at me real funny. I don't know if he ever believed me or not, but that's honest to God's truth. I was drafted in the Marine Corps.
We went out and we took on the ship. We went over to the Pacific, was headed for Guadalcanal. And the 3 buddies of mine, we carved our initials on the boat in San Francisco just before we left, just like young guys will. That plays into the story later. But then we went there, we got going to dock at Guadalcanal, and we couldn't. The Japanese Navy had it controlled, and they were sinking everything we had there. So they went to send us on to New Caledonia, an island somewhat farther away from there, away from the main fighting. We took there, and about we were there about 25, 30 days, maybe a month. And from then we made an emergency landing going back to Guadalcanal to help the Marines at Henderson Field.
And then we boarded ship and shipped out to Guadalcanal. And I was on it was a converted ship. It had been a luxury liner, USS Miss America, and they'd converted it to a troop ship, and it was a USS West Point. We traveled without an escort because that ship could run faster than any escort that they could send with us.
January 1st, 1945, we boarded ship and went to Pearl Harbor. Never got off the ship till landed on Iwo Jima. We went to Saipan from Pearl Harbor and picked up a whole bunch of ships. I mean, there's 800 and some ships. You look out in the ocean, be convoy after convoy every place.
One night I woke up, I was in top bunk, and I was right on the front of the ship because my name is in alphabetical order. They loaded A's first, and the ship, I happened to be on the front of the ship with the last letter of my name. And I woke up down on the bunk, at the bottom of the bunk, hurting myself real bad, and the ship had been torpedoed. Got back up on deck, and there it was. We were on the very front part of the ship with about, maybe 50 people, soldiers. Every one of the sailors were killed, went down with the back ship. We never did know how many went down, but it was 500 of our soldiers. About 450 went down, as 50 of us saved.
I'll tell you, the scaredest I ever was in my life, I was up on the front lines. They told me they wanted the concertina wire, Bob wire, put out in front of the front lines. I carried that out there. It was real heavy. And that's pretty tough. I ain't kidding you. I can pick up milk cans, but this thing was heavy. I walked out there about 75 yards and stretched it out and put trip flares on each side of it. And I couldn't have a weapon. The only thing I had was a knife. If a Jap had said boo, I dropped dead right there. I mean, I know my hair was standing on end.
And I was up in the bow of the ship, just looking around, and I saw this thing go cutting through the water in front of the ship. And after a while, a chief petty officer came up. We were standing there talking, and I told him about it. And he went back to the conning tower then, and they evidently speeded up because later I walked back to the back of the ship, and the same thing happened back there. So we were being fired on by a submarine. Those were torpedoes.
They opened up on us. I had to run to a tree. And as I run to that tree and started to dive for it, something whizzed by my ear. And I fell against the tree and it went right between my fingers. This actually happened. The bullet hit the bark of it, and it just missed me because I was falling. I hit on the root. And there's the Japanese up in the tree. They went up there all the time. The snipers did.
So we're supposed to knock out this lighthouse. And he came and said, we're going to hold up a few days and maybe they won't expect us, and then we'll take them. About 4 o'clock in the morning, I heard the tremendous gunfire. I knew something was not right. So I hollered at the first sergeant and I said, "Sergeant, get the men ready. There's something gone wrong. We're going to take off and go down to the trail and see what's going." So we got ready and we walked down there, stopped, waited. I looked for that flare to shoot that he talked about. No flare. The radio I had wouldn't work. It's quiet. I don't know where he is. He doesn't know where I am. I don't know who's in the lighthouse. I don't know who's dead or who's living. I stood there at the bottom of that trail and I thought to myself, my God, I got to make a decision. I don't know what to do. I went up and I jerked the door open and there was Simon standing there. Blood all over his face. He looked at me and he said, "You want the plain language?" He said, "Strasbaugh, you son of a bitch." He said, "What took you so long?" He said, "I thought we were all dead." I said, "Captains, so did I. I thought I was dead too." And I finally said to him, "What in the world went wrong?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you what went wrong." He said, "We got up there where we were supposed to be." And he said, one of the Japanese came out to use the latrine. And when he did, one of our men shot him. And that, might say, caused all hell to break loose.
Where we was fighting, guys were getting killed and wounded all the time. And my BA Armament, I was assistant BA Armament I was carrying. I had bandoliers of ammunition, and he was from the Carolinas. I can't remember, but he was married and had 2 little boys. One of them looked like about 4 and 2, cute little guys. He showed me the pictures, and he was reading a letter, and they said, "Okay, let's move out." And he put that letter back in. He went first, and I was up on my knees getting ready to follow him, and the Jap shot him in the neck and killed him.
Here's where God came in and helped me. The wind came up that valley out of there. We were holding Epo Dam because if it went up, Manila was out of water and everything else. And we went up there and that fog lifted. Here our company had clear view of the sunlight, moonlight. We slaughtered those Japanese. That was the last big battle of the Philippines. We slaughtered those from, you can't believe how many. And then we'd have to go around, and there's the one picture I had taken. The next morning, we'd have to take 2 men, one with a rifle, one with a knife. And he'd go around and he'd check and see if the Japanese bodies were dead. Sometimes they weren't, sometimes they'd get up behind their back. And that's what the guy with the knife was kind of cruel telling you, but the guy with the knife would stick his knife in each one and be sure they're dead, because they did the same to us.
A corporal met us, and he told all of us, he said, "If you know how to pray, you better start praying now." I didn't understand what he meant, but it didn't take me long to find out. All the time I was on there, ate C rations, K rations, lived in a hole. You didn't dare, you couldn't get out and walk around. And they had bodies in lines because they couldn't bury them. And at times I thought, this isn't real, you know what I mean? It didn't seem real to me. It seemed like having a nightmare.
Behind my commissary tent was a ridge, and there was a gun battery, anti-aircraft gun battery up on that ridge. And one Sunday morning I got up and walked and stepped outside the back of the tent, and I saw this white flag, white piece of paper on a stick sticking out from between some rocks. So I called to the 3 guys up at the gun battery, told them I had something down there that come down and help me. So they came down, and we decided it was a Japanese that holed up in that cave, and he couldn't get out. And so we called a translator from headquarters. He came up there and he told him to strip down to nothing but a loincloth, and they'd let him out. So he did, and we rolled the rocks away and he came out.
The only thing that saved my life is my helmet took the blunt end of this when the shell went off, and my brother picked shrapnel out of me, I'd say for 2 years after I came home. In fact, there's a piece of shrapnel coming out of that finger right now. It works out of my body. I had a piece taken out when I was 65, and another piece taken out when I was about 70, and then this is working out now. So, yeah, them Japs gave me something to remember them by.
I worked in this factory. I enjoyed working in the factory, and I worked in the machine shop, and I was a drill press operator, and my jig on my machine dropped accidentally. Something was wrong with my machine, drilled a hole through my thumb. But they took me to the doctor, and it just a few days, the doctor had it all wrapped up and covered up good. I couldn't get wet or anything. So a few days, I was back on the job.
Well, for one thing, we ate all different kinds of game. Because meat was rationed, you had to have the little red ration coupons, plus money, but you had to have the ration coupons in order to even go into the store to get the meat, and you had to pay for it still too. And then you were also rationed with things like flour and sugar and shoes. You could only have one pair of shoes every 6 months.
Well, I never realized it before. You know, Mother was going back to high school. He was gone, and then my uncle was gone too, but my granddad and grandmother looked after us, and I had great-grandmothers and granddads. But there really wasn't men in the picture until I'm in kindergarten. But he wrote us constantly, you know, and addressed him to us. But I just didn't realize it. Everything was, I lived right in the busiest part of town. The high school was across the street, the church was down on the corner, so there was a lot of activity. So I suppose we didn't notice because there was so much going on.
My mom, my mother, and her friends that worked with her in the studio, because she kept the studio running just like a very well-oiled machine. And, but they got together one evening and someone had found grass skirts and things, and so they all dressed up and took turns taking pictures of each other. So there is a photograph of my dad's darkroom over in Germany, and it has all these little photos up on the wall of the girls.
Well, of course, everything was rationed. And I lived in Racine, Wisconsin. And of course, my folks were still on the farm, and they did all their butchering, and they had a lot of their own produce and things. And so they sent me ration stamps for meat and different items that were kind of hard to get. And then we had ration stamps for gasoline, and you could only, you couldn't travel a lot.
Well, fortunately, we lived on property that had fruit trees galore. So my mother, it had a grape arbor, cherry trees, so she canned. She's very frugal, my mother was. And so she canned grape juice, and then she would can the cherries for pies, and we utilized everything we could.
And they told us then, they called us in, they said, we're going to Japan. But again, dates were not revealed. But I saw a map. I knew exactly where we were going and what we were going to do. We were going to be on the first wave on the left flank. I think they called it Red Beach. They said 75% of you won't survive it. That's what they told us. And then, while we're waiting to do that, the bomb is dropped. And then, well, after the bomb dropped, they sent our unit to Japan, and they wouldn't let me go. I was willing, but they said no. They said, you've been here long enough.
We come into California. This is another thing. We came down the bay in the barge, the same barges that we went down to the port of debarkation, and got on there and walked down in the group right where we were before. I and two other guys had put our initials on the handrail. I looked there, and there was those initials. I was there. My two boys were dead. The two buddies were dead. That kind of broke me up a little there, too.
We're always thinking about getting back home then. But they happened to get us on the first boat leaving, and some of the other guys had been there longer than we had, and they didn't like that idea. But the Colonel Tippett's the one that dropped the first atomic bomb. He'd be able to get us on the first boat leaving that island and head back for the States.
The bombers had started to go to Japan. And when they got the word to turn and come back, they started circling Iwo Jima with their landing lights on, turned right down on the island. It was just lit up as bright as day all over that island. And they circled up there for a while, then flew on back to their base.
everyone was just elated, just completely elated. And I was sort of walking around, you know, like, I don't know, yeah, like, is it really over? You know, sort of like, oh, wow, is this for sure? You know.
Everybody was so excited. Everybody took to the streets. And my husband and I took to the streets, but my son was at home. He had something and he was quarantined. He had a contagious disease of some description. He was quarantined. And I left him at home and went out into the street with my husband. And he got in the window and he'd holler out, "Where's my mother? Where's my mother?" I decided that I would like to make a quilt, a Baltimore album quilt for myself. And I thought, well, a Baltimore album quilt is supposed to have a theme, or some of them do. So I decided that the theme would be, my theme would be World War II, because I'd been going to all of these reunions with these World War II soldiers and so forth. And I had all kinds of information about World War II. So I made this quilt, and then they had printed up the names of all the battles and all the awards and all the citations that they won. So I wrote all these battles and awards and so forth in my quilt in permanent ink. And then I had a block dedicated to the 88 men who lost their lives, the 745th Tank men who lost their lives in World War II.
Some people didn't like the idea of dropping those bombs on Japan, but if they hadn't been on Pearl Harbor, there wouldn't have been no bombs on Japan. So they started. We had to do what we could to end it.
There was a reason for it. We had a good reason for it because we were attacked. And then, of course, our allies were attacked also. And it's more or less a necessity to look out for one another.
I got more respect for a man than I had. I was a young buck coming up, thought I owned the world, you know, hell. And I was in good health, and it did hurt my health a little, but that come along with the war. It's a little price to pay for the freedom we have.
Well, I think as I'm speaking today, World War II was a combined effort by everybody in the United States that I can think of, and everybody seemed to be willing and ready to do it because we were attacked. But the wars we've had since then, and I don't mind naming them, Korea, Vietnam, and some of the other small wars, and here we are in Iraq. You don't have the support you had before because people aren't convinced that it's the right thing. But in World War II, I don't think anybody questioned whether it was right or not.